My name is Drew Faulkner, and I am the current treasurer of Les Dames DC. It's an international group of women in food, fine beverage, and hospitality. And this today is our webinar entitled Let the Meat Zoom, the Future of Culinary Tourism After COVID-19. And I know all of us can't wait to get out and get traveling again. And these experts that we have on today will enlighten us with opportunities now and in the future. But I'd like to say first a couple more words about the Les Dames d'Escoffier Washington, D.C. chapter. We're an invitation-only group of professional women in food, fine beverage, and hospitality dedicated to education and philanthropy and supporting women in our industries and community. We're also a member chapter of Les Dames d'Escoffier International, which has 2,400 members internationally with 44 chapters in the United States, Canada, Mexico, the United Kingdom, and France. Again, we welcome you today to this webinar, and please, you're all now on our mailing list, and please stay tuned for our up and coming other events, other webinars. And with that, I'm going to hand the speaking over to Amy Riolo. Amy?
Thank you so much, Drew. Happy Travel Tuesday, everyone, and thank you so much for being here with us today. It's a great and timely topic. So I'm the chairperson of our local DC chapter's Global Culinary Initiative. And the mission of the Global Culinary Initiative is to embrace our culinary global communities through connections that provide educational programming, training programs, and cultural exchange. So of course, there's no better way to do that than with culinary tourism. But during these times, it's a little bit difficult for us to do that. So this is the topic that we're going to explore today. And before I hand it over to our fearless leader who did a great job of orchestrating this program, Johanna, I will leave you with a quote from Mark Twain, who said, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And many of our people need it sorely on these accounts." So I can't think of a better way to start off. And Johanna Mendelson Forman, who brought this program to me and had the idea to do it, is an adjunct professor at American University. She's a very active member of Les Dames d'Escoffier, and she's also the creator of Conflict Cuisine. So Johanna, I would like to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Amy, who is also wonderful leader in the Global Culinary Initiative. And thank you, Drew, for helping to coordinate all of this. I know our president was not able to join us, and you always step in not only with your expertise, but with your willingness to serve. And we have a wonderful panel today. In the time that we have, which is from now until 2:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, for those of you watching in other time zones, you'll have to figure out the math. But I am really pleased because this subject started to come to the surface immediately after restaurants started closing. And I don't know if you're aware of how much money culinary tourism generates, but there were some estimates that globally it's about $1.7 trillion if you include cruises, and that the labor force alone in the United States, about 80% of the people who work in some of the food areas work in restaurants, and they also are part of the supply chain. So we've all heard the stories about the tragedy that has undertaken our workforce and also of the businesses because of what has happened to COVID. But the travel sector is particularly hit because, as Amy said, what Mark Twain aptly noted, that travel tourism has become a boom industry since the beginning of the 21st century. And I know some of our speakers today have been very involved in it. Mitchell Davis, whom you'll hear from first, was involved in the world's 50 best restaurants. Yigal Schliefer, who's been involved in this business of culinary backstreets, got into it. But gastrodiplomacy, destination tourism is a big business item around the world. Countries rely on it. It's a tool of soft power. It's a way of distinguishing a nation's cuisine. And it's also feeding the curiosity and the economic development of the world. As people travel, they want to taste the world. There was a wonderful chart, and I'm going to send it around to anybody who came here, that the World Travel Tourism Association put, that 80% of all travel research what they eat and drink before they travel. 63% of millennials seek restaurants as a first choice. 53% of all travelers globally last year were culinary travelers, and 49% of them were beverage travelers. I don't know what that means, whether they were alcoholic or not, but they were beverage travelers. The point is that according to the World Tourism Federation, 7.2, I love the percentages, out of 10 travelers choose a destination primarily because of food and drink. So we are onto a world which now places barriers to that, but we also have panelists who've been working on how to address it, how to do this safely as we go forward, because this is a long-term proposition in terms of managing an epidemic, a disease for which there's right now no cure and no vaccine. So I'm going to let you all listen carefully. We will then have opportunity for question and answers, and I hope you'll use the Q&A function on the Zoom to write us any questions or comments you want. We'll direct it to the speakers. You can have a general question or specific questions to speakers, but I think we will go forth and ask the speakers first to be able to tell their story. So I'm going to start with Mitchell Davis, and I'm going to unmute you, Mitchell. I think I can unmute. Yes, you're unmuted. Mitchell Davis, for many of you who don't know, is the Chief Strategist and Chief Strategy Officer of the James Beard Foundation. I think you've been there for 25 years, if I'm not mistaken.
A couple more, but yes, 27.
Well, I was trying to make you young. But in addition to that, Mitchell has been a chef, a writer. He headed the United States Pavilion in the 2015 Food Expo. And I can't think of anybody who is not only brilliant academically, but knows this field inside out. And his chairmanship of the North American World 50 Best also leads to the culinary diplomacy component of this and knows better than anybody about what this impact is. So Mitchell, I'm going to turn this over to you and let you speak for about 8 minutes, and we're going to learn. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Johanna, and thank you to Les Dames of DC for inviting me to participate. There are so many ways I could walk into this conversation, but I'll just start with today, where restaurants that have been operating for 3 weeks in Miami-Dade County have been forced to close again. And when we think about running a small business of any kind, not just restaurants, obviously the uncertainty of what's to come in the future is really one of the biggest challenges you have. You can plan for almost anything you know, within reason. For anything you don't know, it's almost impossible to plan. And one of the things we've seen throughout this entire COVID pandemic experience, which is unique in as much as it's a global experience, there haven't been very many things where the entire world has had to respond in a certain way, is that the restaurant sector has been, even in light of all of the tremendous hardships that have befallen every industry and individual and travel sector, the restaurant industry has been hit the soonest, the swiftest, and perhaps the hardest. And there are a lot of reasons for that, and we can all think of them, and you've probably, we've been very successful in getting the message out. So you've seen Tom Colicchio, or you've seen Kwame Onuachi on TV explaining the challenges that industry faces that are different from some others. But tourism is certainly a huge thing. So if you think back to February of this year, which seems like a lifetime ago, as an organization, the James Beard Foundation was gearing up to get people to start eating in Chinese restaurants. And I know myself, I was moving through Chinatown. I normally live in New York. Right now have the good fortune of being in Maine. They let us come in, which took some doing. And just as we were about to do a survey of how people were going to be hit, this is back March 11th, actually, how restaurants were going to deal with this, that weekend, the mandates to close all restaurants and bars in cities across the country and states, and then eventually almost countrywide, except for 1 or 2 exceptions, began. And that was before many places had even seen any cases. I obviously was in New York, which was second. I guess Seattle was first, but New York was hit hardest. And that took almost everyone by surprise. I'll recall the Sunday when the governor of Illinois said all the restaurants had to close that night. And so imagine you are running a business that no matter how successful is runs on very tight margins, for which cash flow is totally key. What comes in goes out to pay people from yesterday, and what comes in, what you expect to come in tomorrow, will come to pay people today. And I'm talking about places that are well run. That's just the nature of the business. And suddenly they were forced to close for an unknown time before anything else had closed, and without any sort of cushion or idea of what would happen. So as an organization, the Beer Foundation reacted really quickly, because we saw quite soon that even if the restaurants were to open in a week, there would be some serious problems. Where the first 60% of the first 15 million, first 11, 60% of the first 11 million people on unemployment were restaurant workers. If you cannot actually do your business, you cannot actually continue to pay people. Many of them without health care, all the sorts of things that have become now part of the public discourse about the challenges that as a society we face in America, I think began to emerge in the restaurant industry. So we are now months into that situation. As I said today, restaurants that were excited to open have now been forced to close. And the reality is, according to some estimates, as many as 75% of all independent restaurants may have to ultimately close. And I have a list as part of a report that we did of hundreds and hundreds of restaurants from a month ago that have permanently closed across the country. And there's no question in my mind that that's going to be in the hundreds of thousands. And that could be every industry, but unique to restaurants, I think, is both the way that they function, but also the value that they contribute to our community. So Johanna made a really great introduction about travel and the role, how many people sort of choose where they're going to go based on what they might eat. I'm the living example of that. It's pretty much the only reason I go anywhere, frankly. And then maybe if there's a ruin or a historic thing or an opera or something to see, I'll do that. But if you think about what it takes to be able to make a decision to go eat somewhere, and the sort of system that has to be in place for that, you begin to see the logistic challenges of operating a business at a thin margin with low cash flow in that time. Very early, the Beer Foundation created a relief fund. We helped create an organization called the Independent Restaurant Coalition to try to amass some political clout for the industry that is, though very, very large, is quite dispersed and decentralized. I mean, there are some very large restaurant chains, obviously, but if you think of your favorite restaurant on the corner of your street, or the favorite restaurant you went to last time you were here, I'm in Maine right now, in Maine, that's not part of a giant chain, and that's not part of a political system that had any mechanism to fight for stimulus money or the sorts of things that restaurants need. And we created an organization to help do that. And one of the outcomes of that organization is a report that a few statistics we've mentioned, and it's a report about why it's really important to bolster this restaurant community across the country, whether you're in a small town or you're in a big city. And one of the main reasons is this notion of culinary tourism, because if you think about it, very few restaurants sustain themselves based on the community that's around them. A lot of them do, and I think one of the outcomes of this whole situation in terms of business resilience is more and more will focus on local communities, and I think that's actually really clientele, local businesses, local farms. We've really the food space about resiliency of markets and the lack of resiliency, I should say, that comes from a global perspective. I actually think the most dynamic thing to come out of this situation is going to be an approach to business that both diversifies revenues for restaurants. So we see takeout, we see delivery, we see restaurants that are turning into grocery stores, all that sort of stuff. That's out of necessity. It's not actually in their business plan, but I do think the outcome of that will be resiliency, but then also a focus on the local community and the local suppliers. And one of the eye-opening things that pertains to the conversation we're having today to me is you begin to see where the shortcomings of a sort of orchestrated federal approach to these things are. So imagine that you're going for any reason, for a business reason, for a convention, or because you're going to go see a show on Broadway, and you come to a city to make a reservation. If we're in this moment where everyone has a bit of I'll say, anxiety, justifiable fear about eating out, and you are not convinced that the local norms of safety and hygiene are as stringent as you'd like them to be, you're not going to go out to eat. And restaurants very early on were aware of this, especially those that, James Beard Award winners or World 50 Best winners, whose business completely shut down because they were primarily made by people who come from other places. But the flip side of that is if you're going to reopen, you actually really need an orchestrated, standardized effort so that everyone feels comfortable, not just people locally for political reasons or because there just aren't, I'm here in Maine, there are very few cases. The friends we're staying with are infectious disease experts who are writing the protocols for the whole state. And they will tell you that yes, you have to be stringent here just as you would in any of the, in Arizona today or in Florida, but because of the lack of density of cases, you're much better off here. Still, the standards have to be the same for people coming from other places. And we've seen this even in Maine, which if you're going anywhere that's quarantined for 2 weeks, or now the ban to Europe from American citizens, imagine that that's the focus of your business. If you're on the World's 50 Best list, which if any of you lives near one of those restaurants that made that list, you probably have a little bit of bitterness in you because you used to be able to go there pretty regularly. I live next to 11 Madison Park, which at one time was the #1 restaurant in the world. And as soon as it became the #1 restaurant in the world, no one locally could go there. And that's because A, you couldn't get in, but B, because you also didn't want a 26-course tasting lunch. You actually just wanted lunch. And so this whole industry has shifted in a certain way to adapt to the statistics that Johanna said that have made it actually not resilient to the moment that we face now when people are being forced to stay home, or at least looking for a kind of standardized experience, not of the food or the hospitality or the culture, but of the hygiene and of the sense of safety. So I have a couple minutes left, and because we're this many weeks into this conversation, I think some of the things that I'm going to put out there, because I know some of our panelists will have a lot to say, and I think it might generate some questions, are, I actually see this as a major redefinition moment for our industry. And I've mentioned a few of those things. If you're a restaurant in the theater district of New York and Broadway is now closed until at least 2021, you cannot pivot your business to do takeout because no one lives in your neighborhood. You cannot imagine sort of fundamentally what your business model is in a situation that the main driver of that doesn't exist. That's true of any restaurant for which tourism is an issue. So that kind of redefinition of what we are, that's why we call this an existential crisis in the restaurant industry. And I know I'm speaking, every other industry could be having the same conversation, but this is what we're here to talk about, and this is what's dear to me. Another thing is, what is the question of hospitality? We think of hospitality as, in America, in a very particular way. It's the customer's always right, frankly. It's also our business model, and it is a form of hospitality. But that's not true of other places, and it certainly cannot be true right now when the customer's behavior actually imperils the staff of a restaurant, or when we think of a warm embrace or the sort of conviviality of a dining room in a restaurant that we love, and yet we can't do that for all the reasons we know, whether it's social distancing or PPE or limited capacity, what have you. So redefining what hospitality means, and I think there are ways. I often use the example of Japan, a place that I love to travel for food, and that you see when everyone knows the new rules, everyone participates in the same way. So some people go to Japan and think, oh my God, this place has terrible service because they don't know what to do with me. That's usually Americans, because in America, the customer is always right. In Japan, the people know how to behave and participate. And so I'm just using that as an example as a way that I think we need to redefine what hospitality is. I also think we're in this moment where we have to redefine what restaurants are. This is something for the Independent Restaurant Coalition and with the James Beard Foundation, certainly we've been scratching our head about. And like many things, these are trends that have been exacerbated by the COVID experience, but people are now eating full-on multi-course restaurant meals in front of their televisions or on their own dining room tables, or prepared by ghost kitchens, or picked up on the side of the road, or, as I said before, you go grocery shopping to get sort of high-quality ingredients at a restaurant, at a place that you used to only be able to eat in. All these sorts of things. I don't think anything is any less of a restaurant in that way. One friend of mine in the industry wondered if one of the outcomes in cities would be the kind of French traiteur, the caterer, the chef, creative chef caterer who would be making wonderful food to go. And I actually think that'd be an awesome outcome. And I love that aspect of traveling through France. But I use that example also as right now the industry is thinking in a tremendously radical way about how it can move forward. And all of that is the cultural side, the pieces that we're talking about, culinary tourism. The same is happening on the business side. It simply can't go on. A restaurant can't be as susceptible to any of these things. It's not the last pandemic we'll have. We've orchestrated several programs with the Aspen Institute, one of which was called Safety First, which was to try to standardize across the country the highest level of safety for exactly the reasons I said, so that every restaurant would be able to follow a similar standard. We've been working on the design issue right now with a group of great architects and ventilation experts and CDC members, also with Aspen. But no restaurant on earth can afford the ventilation that you need, which is hospital quality, and it certainly wouldn't be open for long enough if it did. So again, I have no answers, and today I feel like I have fewer than I had even just a week ago because of the constant changing nature of this. But I do think we have to think about the industry. We have to think about the nature of the experiential industry of providing people the things that they're coming and traveling for, and that those that are, and we've seen this already, the most flexible, the most quickly able to pivot, those that have the closest relationships with their staff and treat them the best, have been the ones so far that have survived and that I think are going to have the flexibility to survive. They've changed from a tourist audience to a more local community-based audience. They've changed their supply chains, all the sorts of things that you need to do to react in this kind of chaos, which is the only word to describe it from the industry standpoint. And I'll end on a positive note. I do think when I look 3 or 5 years out, I think we're in for the most exciting food time we've ever imagined. I think so many people have grown up in so many ways, and it's easier for me to see 5 years from now what a dynamic jump in America's food culture and in appreciation and travel for restaurants and all that has happened. Much harder for me to see how we get there because there will be a lot of pain on the way.
Mitchell,
I'll stop there.
Thank you for that very informative overview from, I think it's the 10,000 foot view, but you've raised many questions. I just want to say that Immanuel Kant was the philosopher who talked about hospitality. And one of the features of hospitality is that it distinguished democracies from other states, because the goal when anybody entered another country was that you had to be hospitable, that you had to have open borders. And I think that's the big challenge in culinary tourism, is what are we going to do? Are we going to create a more positive multilateral environment so people can move about and our country's going to be welcoming? Because right now that's the challenge. And that leads me to our next excellent panelist, who is an expert in hospitality and also runs the Global Hospitality Center at the Georgetown Business School, Erinn Tucker, who is a Dom and is also a wonderful participant in our organization and a public speaker. So Erinn, I'm going to turn it over to you, if you don't mind, and you can build on what Mitchell says from your own experience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Johanna, for putting this together. Thank you to the Doms of DC for organizing this. My name is Dr. Erinn Tucker. Yes, as Johanna mentioned, I'm the faculty director and associate professor of the practice for the Global Hospitality Leadership Master's Program at Georgetown University. And I'm also the co-founder of DMV Black Restaurant Week. And what has been really interesting about being in both of the space of both education as well as where we are today is this kind of evolution of what the customer wants, what the traveler wants, and then ultimately how we actually produce this. So I'll kind of go more into the fact of what we're talking about today, which is culinary tourism. One of the avenues that really brought DMV Black Restaurant Week together is that within 2018 and kind of the last couple of years, there was just this plethora of stories that came out of the industry on the treatment of African Americans in restaurants and the service industry. And what ended up happening was I was reading this and I started reading all these great articles about, where are the Black chefs and where are the Black owned restaurants? And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? I've been in this space now for over 20 years. I started at Johnson & Wales. I am in teaching. I worked in the restaurant side. What do you mean, where are they? They are here, but I realized there was not really a platform for them. And so when I started to look at these, these different Black Restaurant Weeks, I noticed very quickly in bringing together two of the other co-founders for our team, AJ, is that we could not actually go into thinking about approaching this the same way that the industry does. So as kind of Mitchell mentioned about kind of this redefining what it is, or what is a restaurant, what is a week, what is this and that, we realized very quickly that we had to take an inclusive model. We had to go inclusive wise. Because if we went and approached a week such as of a 3-course, dinner and 2-course lunch at a particular, dollar amount, that would not be inclusive of many of the African-American restaurants. Many are takeouts, many are wine bars, many are coffee shops. So this element of, do they serve food? Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and include them. So we had to go and tweak that model very quickly and realize that it opened up a much more larger plethora of organizations. We also realized that there were also organizations and restaurants that were not Black owned, but they supported our mission. And that mission was to be able to support and sustain Black owned businesses within the space, using both education, professional development to provide the customer with an authentic experience. And so from there, we had organizations such as Busboys and Poets, which is not necessarily Black owned, but they are exquisitely designed with an inclusive model in their training that also wanted to be a part. And we said, let's go ahead and add them too. Then we had companies such as a Thompson Hospitality Group out of Reston, Virginia, who owns about 30 restaurant concepts. They are Black owned, but they don't necessarily serve what would be considered traditional food. Traditional kind of that traditional, very narrow perspective of what Black food is. And we got hammered by a lot of people who didn't understand that, who they were, and then they eventually realized, oh, this is a much larger discussion. What we also have noticed during COVID-19, and where it kind of leads into food tourism right now, is the factor that the reality is that many of our restaurants that are in neighborhoods are actually doing better. They're doing so much better that they don't even have the ability to be able to have the resources in order to get more traffic, because now the customer is looking for the authentic experience within neighborhoods, but their ability really to be able to kind of walk to their establishment and to purchase and buy is what's needed right now. So the neighborhood restaurant is actually, depending on where the restaurant is actually not doing too bad. And so therefore the customer is beginning to define what they want to spend their money on, why is it important, what is considered a Black owned, what is considered a local. And so with that brings us then into culinary tourism. So the first year that we had our event, we were told by Destination DC, which is our destination management organization in DC, that they had 9,000 hits to their website just trying to find where the restaurants were. So now we're talking about an avenue where nobody was coming looking for the monuments. They're not going to the DMOs to look for where the monuments are. They're looking to see, where do we eat? And so there was a complete kind of redesign in, once again, being an organization that's a DMO, but is more local. So now its DMOs are working locally with small business owners to be able to showcase them. And so that's where we are kind of in this food tourism and culinary tourism discussion, where we've always known that food brings people together. However, the approach in the last 20 years has just changed dramatically. We've gone from just traveling for food and drink as a tool of enjoyment. Now it's going into, it became kind of a range of experiences to, wanting to know more about who are the curators, who are the chefs, or what are their stories. But that cell phone, everybody talks about social media, but that cell phone changed the game, because then it became, well, where do we go? What's hot? What's in? Where do we move towards? What's good? What's authentic? And why do I need to just stay in one particular area to do that? So food then for the traveler became much more exploratory, to now, as even you mentioned, Johanna, the fact that the motivation, people are actually now motivated to actually travel to destinations for that. So the World Food Travel Association really recognizes this, and therefore their 3 pillars of education, adventure, and curiosity is what's driving food tourism, which is kind of very similar to even how we have in our model of culture, education, and good food with that. So, one of the things that I am very kind of challenging, that I challenge our industry on, is that we have not done a very good job in articulating our economic, social, and cultural importance to the GDP. We have to have a presence on a federal and global level, because now people are talking about and really seeing that, oh, when we say that we represent 1 in 10 jobs, and that 10% of GDP is really attached to the industry, people just kind of overlook that, and now people are really seeing that it's very important. As we move more into destination tourism, the question has been posed: is tourism dead, right? And the reality is that no, tourism is not dead. It just needs to be re-examined. And a lens of the hospitality, as even Mitchell mentioned, rooted in tourism. I mean, for me, hospitality is the welcoming of the guests. Tourism is the business of movement. They are not interchangeable. They work together. And so with that, I think that hospitality is going to be the driver that is going to bring us back together. Like, we've lost hospitality. We in the US, we're very transactional, but we have not that whole welcoming of the place. Or whether, you know, if I'm using a DC reference, I'm a high-end restaurant in Northeast and I can't rock out with a takeout in Southeast DC. No, it's time for us to start working together, being more inclusive, whether it's on a catering perspective, whether it's on doing collaborative programming together. It's time that we're all in this. So we need to start really working together on that. The United Nations World Tourism Organization in 2017 actually produced the Global Code of Ethics for Tourism. In Article 6, it actually stated the obligation that stakeholders have to really be able to articulate safety to the traveler. And so now this is our responsibility to be able to, you know, start coming together to have some sort of actually being able to articulate that to the people that come to our establishments. And that's where restaurants and hotels and airlines should all be articulating the importance of safety, but the security part is where we're kind of all different in how we actually go about doing it. But safety should be really where our focus is. And once again, it kind of goes right then back to our local tourism avenues. And just kind of closing, where's the future when it comes to career paths? So being on the education side and having been in the space of here at Georgetown, and then in many other universities that I've worked, one of the things that Georgetown really prides themselves on is that all of our master's of professional studies programs, we have actually a class called Ethics and Hospitality, and that's what I teach. And focusing on ethical dilemmas, because that's what we're going through right now. This decision making is not about whether it's legal or not legal or any of those things. It's what do you stand for? What do you believe in? And with that element of your ethics needs to kind of come out. So their ability to really be able to show how your decision making is impactful is one of the things that really kind of pride ourselves on at Georgetown in one of the classes that we have. But that's also a discussion. That's something that's not taught in culinary school. Now we need to start, you know, thinking about that when we start putting our curriculums together. Travel and tourism is such a highly emotional industry. Nobody gets into this because it's easy. Okay, this is not an easy, especially not the restaurant industry, because it's easy, but it's because there is a passion, there is a love, there is an emotion. And so with that, we need to start to be able to have this as part of our curriculum for many of our students that come through our programs, but as well as, you know, just a discussion overall within the industry. And thirdly, it's time to kind of look at careers in this sector, because so many students have been furloughed. So many of our faculty who work in the industry have been furloughed, to really start looking at other sectors such as supply chain, food suppliers, financial services, marketing, that are all part of our industry, but we haven't really thought about it that way. We thought about it in a more logistical perspective. Now we need to think about how we can take our skills and how transferable they are in other sectors. And then lastly, it's time to start to open this discussion up of culinary tourism for it to include the continent of Africa. We do not think about African cuisine unless we're talking about African cuisine in the US. Kenya is doing some phenomenal work. South Africa has always been doing phenomenal work, but it's not necessarily explored. It's not embraced. It's the verbs that are used that are written in a very ethnic, negative connotation. It's time to open up. It's time to expand. It's time to embrace. And so with that, there's 1.1 billion middle-class Africans right in the continent that are looking for those experiences. And maybe you have to say to our students, hey, it's time for us to start going and exploring those areas for opportunities. And even though it's, like I said, it hasn't necessarily been always explored or embraced the same, now it's time to do that. So I'll kind of take a pause right there. And Joanna.
Erinn, you've pulled a lot of things together in that and given us many things to talk about. I'm sure the discussion will come back to the very important points you made. Really, thank you for that very kind and terrific overview. Joan, make sure I unmute you. I want to introduce our Grand Dame, Joan Nathan. Joan is a Grand Dame, and for those of you who are not members of La Dame, to be a Grand Dame is the highest honor of this organization. We don't have many of them, but Joan is a well-deserving Grand Dame because not only is she probably the most preeminent writer about Jewish cooking in America, but she's the author of 11 books, and I guess you're starting a 12th as we speak, and is not only a wonderful public speaker, but is a real culinary ethnographer. She goes into places, asks questions, and learns how things are made, and is one of the most well-traveled and knowledgeable people I know and a great friend to all of us women who are involved in the food space. But today, Joan is going to talk about a specific area, which is her role as a leader of culinary tours. So I'm going to turn it over to you and mute myself.
Okay, well, first of all, I loved listening to Erinn, and I have to tell her that I'll mention Ethiopia in my talk, but I love Ethiopia. I love Madagascar. I love Tanzania, and I totally agree with what she's saying. Also, Mitchell, I just love listening to you, but you really didn't talk about people cooking at home, which I think is what this whole period has started, because it's much more satisfying, at least in the 3 places that I've been during this pandemic. One is New Orleans, one is Washington, D.C., and right now in Martha's Vineyard. And cooking at home is so much more satisfying than getting carry out in so many ways, because we have a little bit more time now. And if my kids won't let me go shopping, but if they bring me ingredients, or I go to a farm and get them, it's just so much more satisfying. You can talk to people while you're cooking. And I think that's one of the positive things that has come out of all this. And I agree with Mitchell that in the future, there'll be a lot more, I think a lot more really great recipes, some of them very old recipes that we've, that we're now reusing with maybe a little bit more spice. I made a stew the other night that my mother used to make, and it was so satisfying, but with better ingredients probably than what she used. Anyway, that's not what I was going to say, but let me just start now. Like as many of us in the food world, I adore culinary tourism. Not only have I traveled to places like Ethiopia to watch the tahina harvest in Humera, seeing, of course, so many sights and tasting so many dishes on the journey, or Tanzania, where taking a tiny plane with the flying doctors, we picked up a Maasai who had just been bitten, he was a farmer, by a lion, being so quiet, never uttering a cry of pain. In awe of his bravery, we took him to a nearby Maasai hospital. And both of these experiences, as so many in culinary tourism, teach you to learn about other people and, other people's lives and other people's strengths teach all of us. And I think it's a really important thing, not necessarily just the monuments that you see, but to me, the most important is interacting with people. I spent my junior year abroad in Paris, where I perfected my French and ate the most delicious food in the world. I lived in Jerusalem for 2 years, working for the mayor and learning about conflict head on. I also saw the power of food to quell barriers between people in a city where there's something like 70 different kinds of people, and in the municipal council, 32 different representatives representing all kinds of people. And food was a way, when you like the food, I remember once going to this little Arab village, I often mention this one, with the mayor of Jerusalem, and he didn't really want to go there because he knew that he couldn't fulfill their request to have a concrete road built to their village. It was very far outside. And by the time they served us moussakhan, which is my favorite chicken dish in the world, on bread with onions and cumin and what else, cloves and cinnamon and all kinds of pine nuts and lots of onions. The people got their road, and we also got a great meal. But the point is that so much breaks down through food. I know that Johanna will love that. Anyway, Also, my late husband, Alan, and I visited Vietnam, staying on an island where we witnessed how they made red boat fish sauce. We broke bread with a dear friend in Jordan and visited our friend Mohammed Ben Ais at least 7 times in Asila, Morocco, where my husband spoke politics, Mohammed, mostly arguing, and I spent hours at the town's public oven to watch its rhythm with the people of Asia throughout the day. How I miss not being able to observe people live different lives than me now. I grew up in a family that encouraged this kind of travel. I raised my children with these trips, and I miss these trips greatly. The last time I visited Italy was last spring, where I led a New York Times journey trip that focused on food. I remember when we visited Pitigliano, a little southern Tuscan hill town where the late Etta Survey Macklin grew up, called Little Jerusalem by some. We also went to Siena. The towns depended on tourism. I also noted how in Sicily, like Palermo, where there are beautiful Greek ruins outside the town, and especially in Syracuse, how tourism brought so many tourists there that it helped restaurants and hotels, giving jobs to so many. I could see how culinary tourism has become big business with cooking schools sprouting up all over, new restaurants and bakeries in and along the way to these hill towns. I was surprised to learn that my trips for the New York Times journey are the only ones the New York Times does based purely on the suggestion of the food specialist, in this case with a slant on Jewish food throughout the ages. I've done one to France, one to Italy, and 3 more have been scheduled. One to Poland in October, which probably will be canceled, another to Israel next March, and to Greece next fall. I don't know if any of those are happening. Time will tell. Of course, the fate of those trips is now so uncertain. The way it works for me is that academic travel abroad approached me and asked me to suggest a few places that I have an expertise in and would like to travel to. Just as my books have given me a chance to learn so much, studying up for these trips have been great opportunities to learn. In France, I told the Times, it's called Academic Travel Abroad, what I would like to see in Paris and Provence, where we could learn about Jewish food and history. I also wanted to see things like the Pont du Gard, a few other restaurants too. I found Jewish chefs and people who I knew who had prepared Jewish menus. I suggested meals in people's homes, people whom I had interviewed before. And the tour company even came up with a concert at a synagogue and a visit to Ile-sur-la-Sorgue with a spectacular market before the event. I do not have to do any of the pulling together of logistics and only have to act as an ambassador of Jewish cuisine. I like that very much. It was the same in Italy. We went for a Jewish cooking class in Florence, had a tour of Florence and ate Italian food there. In Siena, we ate at the home of an Italian Jewish family dating from the 1st century. And we visited Pitigliano before going on to Rome, visiting the Jewish catacombs that I had never seen before. We learned to make carciofi alla Judea from an Italian woman I had interviewed for one of my books and ate at a Libyan family's home for dinner. I couldn't have asked for better partners, as the tour company always takes my suggestions seriously and made these 2 trips unique for the participants as well. And certainly I was never bored. And so it has been with the Polish trip, which I imagine will be postponed, perhaps not. I doubt it, but anyway. Right now, all culinary travel is on hold. As we all know, the EU has not opened back up to visitors from the US and some other countries as well, although it is beginning to open in Europe for others. The New York Times has adjusted its terms and conditions to the pandemic. In the past, you had to cancel, for example, 120 days ahead of time to get your money back. Now they say that it's going to be 60 days in advance. Most 2020 trips have been canceled, and while the call center responds to new booking and have been more than generous than other companies, again, in holding the days that you can get your money back. The 2021 trips have not, I do not believe they've been signed up yet at the Times. In the future, they feel that people's appetite for travel will tend to safer countries like Israel, for example. Ironic, no? The Times has also outlined a very detailed protocol going forward, hopefully guaranteeing safe travel and social distancing. They don't want anyone to go in harm's way, so that I don't think until there's real safety, it seems to me until there's a vaccination, most of these things are going to be on hold, but that's just me speaking. Buses will be cleaned at least twice a day. Larger vehicles with space between couples are going to be used now. They're going to eliminate all buffets. There's going to be lots of hand sanitizing, mandatory mask wearing, etc. And these are still being developed for hotels, for buses, for places that you visit. I can't imagine going into restaurants yet. The LA Times trips with Nancy Silverton and Ruth Reichel have all been canceled for now, as well as many others which were in an incubation period. Small group tours like mine in less populated towns might help culinary tourism in the future. On the other hand, the New York Times feels that 85% of an advertised itinerary would have to stay the same. In other words, if they can't offer that, then the tour cannot go on. They are monitoring the situation closely to make the tours travel friendly. As the coronavirus continues. Some of the tours with culinary elements that are still going on are an opera tour with a day of cooking with Sicilians and a trip to San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. That one will have a lot of culinary aspects to it. My hope is that this period of reflection during the pandemic will not only whet our appetites for the cooking we can do at home now, but let us enjoy the flora and fauna in our own backyard and the skies, those skies that are so much clearer without all the pollution. It seems to me that we're going to think more. And what about the chipmunks? How many chipmunks have you seen? And I think that we'll look closer at the future. What do we really want from our future? Perhaps with fewer giant cruise ships, our waters will be cleaner. And if they are taxed in the country in which they really port, they will provide more money to the right governments. Maybe with providing more taxation on cities that exist as tourist attractions to the rich, we will have tourism that may be a little bit more expensive for visitors, but will go farther to create a more equitable working environment for the workers. This is a period that has turned me, like so many others, inwards. Now we can imagine what travel will be like in the future and how we might create a better world through it. And that's really all that I have to say. And this might be a good way that we are going to use food and travel as a way to learn more about people outside our own bubble. And I really hope that this happens, because when we went to Vietnam, we also went to Cambodia and to Angkor Wat, which I understand is totally closed right now. And I just could not believe the hordes of tourists that it was like they were checking one more thing on their itinerary of things to see. They can see those things through movies. They don't have to go there. And yet, I saw all these poorer people in the town of Angkor Wat that really needed some sort of tourism, or maybe money taxing, if these people would be taxed, that would go to them, because after all, it was their ancestors that built these monuments. I don't know, but there has to be a change in equitability for everybody so that the future can be everyone's.
The next person we're going to hear from, Yigal Schliefer, has not only talked about culinary tourism in this way he's done his tours, but he has been thinking very creatively about some of the points that you've raised, about using smaller groups, about creating neighborhood opportunities, of doing things that help the vendors in his different projects around the world, and also giving people a taste, both virtually and in person, with some of the ways that you can understand another culture. So Yigal, without taking more time, I know you have a lot to say.
Thanks.
And you've done a wonderful job in your company. So please tell our audience.
Great. Well, great. Again, thanks, Johanna, for having me, and thanks to the panelists for joining us. Just to give a little background, Culinary Backstreets, we work in about a dozen or more different cities around the world. We got our start in 2012, and we operate, we have both an editorial side, we have kind of an online magazine, and the idea is to really cover the local food scene in the city, but really on a neighborhood level, to really kind of, it's almost, I guess we kind of think of it as culinary urbanism, the idea of how neighborhood spots fit into that bigger urban fabric, and what's their role in city life. So we do that both on the editorial side, but then we also have small group food tours, culinary walks, and then we also now have multi-day trips that kind of have an urban focus, but also go out of the city a little bit, but to also get a sense of how the outskirts of town sort of fit into the picture of culinary life in a particular city. And so we work from Tokyo to Queens, New York, like I said, about a dozen or so different cities. And our expansion, I mean, we got our start in Istanbul, and really the reason why we are kind of expanded is because of an experience we had in Istanbul in 2016. There were several bombings there that attacked tourists. And we saw tourism in Istanbul drop, really overnight to zero. And that was an important experience in the sense of learning about the need to diversify and expand. So what's happening right now is obviously very different because, it's a global stoppage as opposed to in one place. But I think a lot of the lessons that we learned then in terms of the importance of diversifying, of being creative, of sort of, trying to find your audience in different places and how to reach them, apply to today. So, but needless to say, I mean, this is something very different. And it's really forcing us to rethink, what does it mean? Who's the audience? What are the elements of our mission that need to be retooled, in this kind of environment where we know that travel is not going to return for who knows how long, and with people unable to sort of reach the places that they love. And for us, there's always been a built-in tension in what we do, because we sort of, on our editorial side, in terms of the places that we write about, we really think of our audience as local. We want to treat people like locals. So not like tourists, but as really people in their own town who are exploring their own city through food. But on the other hand, we know that our tours and trips are really not something that appeal necessarily to a local audience in general, because people don't want to feel like tourists in their own town. But on the other hand, there may be a shift in that as people can't travel. They may be looking to start traveling within their own locales, be it urban or a little bit outside. So that's really forcing us to kind of rethink, what is the audience? How can we reach people more locally? But the big challenge for us is to, in this new environment, which again, we don't know how long this is going to last, and it's very hard to forecast that. How do we continue providing the same kind of experience, that same sort of feeling? And for us, that involves, it's about food, but it's really about people, this cross-cultural exchange. I think what people really enjoy on the tours that we do, which are small group tours, very experiential, is the idea of interacting with the master kebab maker. I know Joan had that experience in Istanbul, and interacting with the bodega owner in Barcelona. Those interactions. So it's really, we like to say, people come for the food, but they stay for the people, in the sense that it's that human connection that really creates the memorable experience. I mean, the food is obviously very important, but especially in these kinds of little neighborhood spots that we like to feature, and the people there, these sort of unsung heroes, as we like to call them, these unsung heroes of the kitchen, it's that interaction that's really important. So, as we sort of look towards this near-term future or medium-term future, how can we recreate that kind of experience, both in person for people who are local, but also for people who are outside, who are unable to travel right now. And also, how do we fulfill our own mission, which is our mission, as we see it, is to really help support a lot of these neighborhood spots, to kind of give them greater exposure, but also help them survive in their own way, be it through the attention of locals and the attention of people coming from outside. So, how do we still, in this very trying time, how are we still able to fulfill our mission of supporting these little places? So these are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. So for us, we're moving on 2 tracks, and one is thinking of the outside audience. How do we sort of reach people who are not able to come to Istanbul, who are not able to come to Athens, who are not able to come to Tokyo, but really want to have that experience? So a few things that we're working on right now that we're already doing. One thing that we're doing is we're doing something that we're calling Backstreets boxes, which are these curated gift boxes, or food boxes that are city based. So we have our Athens box, we have our Queens, New York box, we have a Barcelona box, and these kind of track in many ways some of the tours that we do, or the tours that we do are very neighborhood oriented. So these are very neighborhood oriented boxes that sort of pick items from different vendors along the way, people who we usually visit on our tours, people who we've written about, and the idea is to very much make this a kind of sort of a tour within the box. So that's one way. We're looking and we're developing virtual experiences, cooking especially. And again, these would sort of track, as opposed to just being kind of, just a cooking class without any sort of context. The idea is to really offer cooking experiences that also track with the things that we do on the ground in a particular city in Athens. So perhaps cooking the dish of a particular place, getting that story along with the cooking class. Erinn mentioned how people now really want those stories, and that's something that we've seen as well in our work. So the idea would be to have a virtual experience that sort of gives you a bit of a tour besides just the learning how to cook a particular dish. And also we've been doing some, more, I guess you could say, mission-oriented activities. We've done one campaign called Save Your Seat, and the idea is as little restaurants in the places that we work in reopened, or oftentimes seating is limited. Let's say capacity is limited to 50%. So for people from outside who want to support favorite little restaurants that they visited, let's say in Lisbon, we've done this so far in Lisbon and in Naples, the idea is that you can buy a virtual seat to help them fill up their lunch. And then hopefully, when the day comes and you can travel there again, you'll show up and, they'll remember that you helped them during that time. So that's a campaign we're doing. And this is more sort of on the mission-oriented side, but it's still a way of giving people a sense that, like, well, I can't go to Lisbon or I can't go to Naples, but I can support this favorite little restaurant there that I visited or that I would like to visit. And again, it's about telling the story of these places and giving people a sense of some kind of interaction. And then the other track we're working on is expanding our outreach to local audiences. And like I said before, we've had more success on the editorial side in terms of reaching a local audience, but in terms of tours and things like that, it's generally, that's not been the model for us. But I think as people are, essentially stuck where they are in many places, the idea is to reach them with activities like outdoor experiences, picnics. We're in Istanbul, for example, we're doing a kind of breakfast by the city walls. There are these old urban gardens that have been, for centuries, have been sort of in place there by the old city wall. So the idea is to do a breakfast there, kind of outdoors. We're doing wine and food clubs where you get to meet winemakers and producers. So things like that. Ultimately, and this is a bit going back to what Mitchell said and Joan, is that we see this also as a time of opportunity in terms of reimagining what things could look like in the future. I mean, in a lot of the places that we work in, over-tourism has become a real serious issue. Barcelona, for example, Lisbon, Porto. And tourism has become, a negative, has come to have some negative connotations in many ways, especially for locals. So I think we're seeing at this time is also as a chance to reimagine what should travel look like? What does it mean to be sustainable and responsible as we move forward? We've created a kind of roadmap that we have up on our website where what we imagine as the future to look like. What does it mean to be a responsible participant in this process of culinary travel, tourism in general? And I think for many of us, it could be a great opportunity to think about how to work with the local participants, local stakeholders in terms of making this sort of more responsible and sustainable as we move forward once travel resumes. So yeah, I'll leave it sort of at that, on that note, because I think that's sort of the big takeaway for the future, especially since things are so unclear right now. Thank you.
I will say I won't waste a lot of time because we don't have a lot left, but I just was thanking you for giving us a perspective about what you've done and the creativity with which Culinary Backstreets has operated, because I think it's a model for lots of people to understand, because you're working with the community, and at the end of the day, those are the people who produce our food and need the business. So I love the seat at a table idea. I think that's a very creative one, and I think we should do more of that in the United States. I think there's some of it to buy gift cards, but it's a very nice term. But we're very lucky next, because I think you build into Alex Safos, who is our next speaker, who is both an expert in Arab studies, but also runs Indigo Travel and has led many tours both to Greece and Morocco and probably other places, and knows firsthand all the challenges of running not only tours, but culinary tours. So I would like to have you, Alex, talk to us a little bit about your experience in this, age of where travel is, people don't want to get on a plane, they don't want to get on a ship, and what options and hope will you give them for the future?
Well, Joanna, thank you for having me, and fellow panelists, thank you for including me as well. I know Erinn talked about hospitality being an important facet of culinary travel, and that's one of the reasons why my company focuses on Morocco and Greece, where hospitality is truly a premium and a special experience to behold. Joan, your evocative descriptions of your travels are hitting me hard right now, as I'm sedentary here in Virginia. Want to travel, at a drop of a hat, and it's been a very difficult time for all of us in the industry, where mobility and experiential moments, have been sacrificed. Not to mention other more severe ramifications. And Yigal, I've used Culinary Backstreets on our trips to Athens with many accolades to you and your staff there. It's been a wonderful addition to our small group tours. So I've been doing adult tours to Morocco and Greece for nearly 8 years. I started doing student tours before that with gap year students focused on Morocco. And the impetus for that was to break down the world and of Islam via a very hospitable, relatively easy destination such as Morocco, which I know very well. I lived in Fez in the 90s, and it was a very special epiphany for me. And I followed that on throughout the years, and have turned to adult cultural and culinary tours as of 8 years ago. Started with prepackaged tours to Morocco, and have expanded that to led small group tours. And Chef Amy Riolo has been a feature on several of our tours to Morocco and Greece, and we've been very fortunate to have her as part of those experiences. But just reiterating what Yigal and Joan hit on, I think small group tours, the focus on small group tours will be renewed. I think that's going to be an important driver to the industry. It allows you to mitigate and manage risk, both as an operator, but also as a traveler. It also gives the manager of a tour more flexibility to modify the experience to situations on the fly, events that become unknown, spontaneous adjustments to the itinerary that are very valuable to the experience. So I think small group tours will blossom even more. And then that's what I do. I'm not interested in larger tours. Most of the tours that I've run are 8 to 10 people maximum, some as few as 3 or 4. I also think that, this sounds a little kitschy, but I think travel to unfamiliar places with familiar faces is going to happen. Private tours with family and friends will grow, where people know their circle and feel more comfortable with their circle. So these epic trips, for lack of a better word, it doesn't have to be grandiose, but these sincere, genuine experiences, I believe will become part and parcel of small group tours, whether it's domestic or global. And just building off of that, destinations that haven't been overrun will become more alluring. So these off the beaten path experiences will become more attractive. Rural experiences, agritourism, I think will increase. So for example, in Greece, where we're trying to, with difficulty, but trying to run a program there this fall with Chef Riolo being a feature, a culinary and cultural tour. We're focusing that trip solely on an island, the Blue Zone island of Icaria, which is renowned for the longevity of its inhabitants. As probably most of you know, there are 5 blue zones, including Costa Rica, Sardinia, Okinawa, and Loma Linda in California, that have these characteristics. So by focusing on a remote Northeast Aegean island where COVID cases have been absent for the most part, I think there was one from a foreign traveler a few months ago. We hope if it doesn't run this fall, it will be a very attractive paradigm for future trips. And for example, if we take that context to Morocco, perhaps trips to Marrakesh won't be as attractive, but maybe secondary cities such as Meknes, an imperial city that's fantastic and less visited, or Tangier, or Middle Atlas Village, or one of the beautiful dramatic cities in the south near the Sahara Desert will become something of interest. Wellness experiences will proliferate, I think, thanks to the pandemic. And not to be grim, you know, the reminder of mortality. I think people who have been putting off trips will be stimulated to go ahead as soon as there's a vaccine, or as soon as there is that comfort level of travel pre-vaccine. They will commit. I think the circle of travelers in the culinary field are self-selected, so that pool is there, and it's just a matter of getting that comfort level back for them to have that impetus to act and commit to these tours. The intimate, experiential, person-to-person encounters will still be sought. I think there'll be even you know, something that's even more valuable. And I'm a proponent, even though now it's very difficult to foresee somewhat, but I think there's not going to be this sense of isolationism or a retrenchment. I think cross-cultural and global encounters and experiences are here to stay. And again, once we're through this phase, I think they're going to grow. There's such a pent-up demand for our discrete market that I'm encouraged and will remain optimistic about that. So those are my general thoughts on the industry and for small group tours. And thank you all for being part of it and being proponents and advocates.
Alex, thank you for that good summary of where you think the industry is going and for that positive view. I think I liked your point about people recognizing their own mortality and seeking those bucket list places once there's a vaccine to go out. So I think it may be a positive for your industry going forward, but I would not want to leave out my partner in crime here, Amy Riolo, who is not only a Dom, but an excellent chef. If you can unmute yourself, because I wanted her to wrap up this session as someone who has staked her claims to culinary tourism through her good cooking and her cookbook. So Amy, take it over and tell us a little bit about how you see the future.
Sure. Thank you so much, Johanna. I really appreciate everybody's comments so far. And if we have time before the Q&A or after, I'll make a little mention, just some suggestions of things that everyone touched upon that I think were great pearls of wisdom. So I try very hard in my personal and professional life to be positive in challenging times and really look for the hidden opportunities that, you know, these times make us and kind of force us to take risks and to look at. And in my experience, I specialize in the Mediterranean lifestyle, and my family is originally from the southern Italian province of Calabria. I currently lead culinary tours in Italy, Greece, and in Morocco. Greece and Morocco, both with Alex. And prior to that, I'd also led tours in Turkey and Egypt. And I tend to focus on places that I know the culture well. I have an access, to the knowledge of the language and different things so that I can really speak to the food, and also to lead small tours. I've never done really large tours just because I want to be able to interpret and to really give people a personalized experience of how they can incorporate, great aspects of the culture into their life. So that's what I bring to this from a professional standpoint. And then as I look at this new time that we go forward, again, same thing, there's a huge overlap with personal and professional. As I look to what we can use to go forward with and what models we can have when there are none and there really are no definite answers, is to take some examples from history. So one of the things I love, and this is a little bit relevant to travel as well, is the city of Venice. Many of us have been there, and I think that Venice is one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and also no stranger to challenging times. So in Venice's history, for example, in the Middle Ages, Venice was a very important spice hub, along with Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, and Cairo. These three cities were, they basically made all of their wealth from the spice trade. So when they learned that the new tour route, the new travel route to Asia had opened up, Venice knew that they were going to lose all of their wealth. And instead of being scared and holding on to the wealth, they used all of their money to beautify the cities and the Grand Canal. And of course, immediately Venice turned into a tourist capital, which it never had been before. It was known for trade. So it didn't need the trade. Now tourism was its new trade. So I try to look at that and I say, how can we, both individually in terms of, just our own personal morale, but also professionally, use this model of Venice, take something that we already have, do the best with it, and, and move forward. And Yigal and Alex gave us some great tips on how to do that and what we have. So one of the tips I'd like to give for everybody, whether it's hospitality, restaurant, any industry that you're in that's feeling a little bit of downtime right now, is we can all take advantage of media. So I spend a lot of time working on, media requests as a subject matter expert, TV, blogs, radio, print media, anything that we can, because people like the idea of traveling vicariously now. And even if I'm just posting a video that I posted 4 years ago, people right now are really excited to look at it and watch it. One, they've got the time to watch it. Two, they want a virtual escape anyway. So by providing this kind of content, it really helps people, and it keeps us in the arena, keeps us talking about tourism and being able to escape even when we can't go. So even if it's a Zoom banner, back here I've got a picture that Alex took in Ikaria in the Aegean, so we can transport ourselves there. And then a step up from that, Yigal mentioned products. Products are really important. This is a model that is working for my restaurant friends and clients, and also for the tourism travel partners, and for myself personally, where we can offer these boxes, packages, things like that. Anybody who's doing that has been able to see a continued effort that hopefully, when tourism comes back, when restaurants come back, when dining out comes back, by having this extra additional stream of revenue, we will have gained something instead of have lost something. So I highly recommend those packages. And for people who are interested in the artisan food movement, like a lot of my partners in Italy, this helps us to be able to go to, really local places, which otherwise wouldn't have distribution, and work with them and potentially get their products or their ideas here into the United States or England or other places. So I've actually created an LLC with my Italian partners called Italian Sensory Experience, just as our travel industry business is, and that works with Italian producers, small producers, which want to get their products into the United States. And I'm personally working on increasing my own product line as well. Another thing I think that we'll see an increase of that's very positive and wonderful and is evergreen content that we'll then be able to use to promote our businesses is the idea of more books, more articles, as Yigal mentioned, the editorial side, and also video content. So we can turn these experiences that we've already had into platforms, whether we use them as advertising or create products that we can then sell. People really need escapes right now. And I think more than ever, you know, my grandmother used to tell me the stories about the Depression, and she would talk about how horrible this time period was, but that, you know, the silent movie industry and that other aspects, theater, gave them these escapes, and people would pay, even though they didn't have a lot of money, they would pay for these escapes to watch fantasy movies of people with beautiful gowns and crystal chandeliers. And nowadays we're not offering that. Like, we've got a hard reality in front of us. Thank God there's nature, but there's no industry that's really providing a very healthy, you know, organic way of a nice escape for people. So I think that's something that we can all do. And then, of course, these local packages, you know, how can we make things local? As Yigal mentioned, you know, he's now doing the things in the city walls in Istanbul. And also, as Alex mentioned, you know, these tours going to places specifically where, thank God, the pandemic hasn't been hit, or doing things a little bit more locally. I know another colleague is called a French Fry in Paris, and he started doing these tours in Paris where he'll take you either on YouTube or on Facebook every Saturday morning at 10. You could travel live with him through Paris. Well, during the pandemic, he did home editions. And so he called all of his he kind of curated all of the information that he has, and he presented it in a very nice format so that you could literally feel as if you were in Paris from your very own home, and he was from his own home during the pandemic. So these are all great ways, I think, that we can take advantage, take the time, go back and then look at how can we do things differently later, as Yigal mentioned, but also, you know, what can we do now so that when we are too busy traveling around, we can have products, we can have you know, written materials, brochures and books, videos available to accompany what we're doing. Hopefully this will be temporary, but in the meantime, you know, how can we do as Venice did and beautify our businesses? And I would like to leave you with one quote. It is from the great Brillat Savarin, who said, "The destiny of nations, the destiny of our future depends on the way that nations nourish themselves." And so I think that's important, that as we're doing this, we're looking to sustainability, we're looking to artisans, we can talk about how the nations that we visit and ourselves, how we nourish ourselves.
Thank you, Amy, for that excellent overview and that optimistic way to bring us to some questions and answers. What I think we should do is, we have 2 questions online immediately. I don't know if you can see the questions or only I can. Can everybody see questions? Okay. So the first one is coming in from Karen Darwoon, and it asks, "I appreciate that small group tours to geographically separate locations are attractive to customers. What about the potential of bringing infections to remote areas? And how will tour operators mitigate risks for people at destinations?" Any takers on that? Mitchell? Or you could all unmute yourself, so, or maybe I have to do it.
I'd let the tour operators speak. I think it's a question that entered my mind also, so I'm glad someone asked it.
But I don't think until they have a vaccine that anyone's going anywhere. That's what I think. You can't. You just can't.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the case of Greece, right now, Americans aren't allowed to travel there for the reasons that we know so well, but they are doing some random testing, COVID testing at the airport, or at airports, international airports, and sharing those results with travelers within 24 to 48 hours. And if positive, you are quarantined for 14 days. So going into a tour right now, you know what that risk is. And we're obviously demanding it now. We're doing the switch from highly recommending medical and emergency evacuation insurance to requiring it as a prerequisite to travel on any of our tours. So presuming everything, let's say you want everyone tests negative and you're at the remote island, the primacy will be on outdoor experiences. I mean, the destination of Icaria allows for that. Outdoor dining, tavernas, social distancing is easy. Hikes to antiquity sites there are easy as well. Cooking and herbal medicinal workshops can be had outside. So there are a lot of things at that destination where social distancing can be met. Granted, there are challenges, but
except the real problem is getting there.
correct, agreed.
If I can just add, I think another thing we need to be conscious of is just local sensibilities. And I think, in a lot of places now, they're less interested in having people come, especially if they've had, lower numbers of cases, they want to keep it that way. So I think we also have to there's a lot to balance in that sense, in terms of approaching things responsibly, really speaking with the locals in terms of finding out what do they want. Obviously they want, they're missing the tourism dollars, but on the other hand, we're in this period where locales are really trying to keep the numbers low, especially when they've been able to do that successfully. And in many places, it's travelers who have been bringing new cases. So there's a lot to balance in that sense.
Okay, let's go to the next question because we are going to run out of time very quickly. From John Petrucci, who says he thanks us for organizing this. He said, are we beginning to see standards being created for walking tours, for visiting factories, vineyards, restaurants, hosting group lunches and dinners? I've gone on culinary backstreet excursions in the past. Realistically, what are we looking at in terms of a timeline?
For 2021, I think.
2021, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, I think because of the challenges to travel, I think one of the major challenges right now is just being able to plan. I think people are very, very worried about, buying a ticket because you just don't know what even a couple of weeks down the road might look like when you look at, places that have suddenly had to shut down again. Israel, for example, Joan mentioned Israel. Israel was doing great, and now they're doing terribly, and they've just pulled back, and they're shutting down. And it's, of course, and you can't travel to Israel unless you're an Israeli citizen right now without having to, you have to quarantine regardless. I'm currently in British Columbia, Canada, where my wife is from, and here also you have to quarantine upon arrival for 14 days. That's just that's just the regulation. So it's very hard to plan right now, and I think that's the big challenge. So I think we're looking, 2020 seems very difficult in terms of doing any sort of activities involving people from outside coming in. And I think, for 2021, a lot of it really does depend on vaccines, on travel, flying becoming some kind of more regulated experience where that your safety is assured, and that the experience of travel is not one that can lead to any sort of any sort of illness. So it's a big challenge, and I think a lot of it really does depend, like I said, on vaccines. So, but the hope is 2021 is a time when we can start offering multi-day trips that, like Alex said, are more outside of town, are more kind of have a more of a rural focus, are more aimed at groups of people who know each other, as Alex mentioned. And to really sort of shift the focus away more from urban travel, which is what we're more used to doing, to things that are experiences that are more outside of town, and with these groups are familiar to each other.
And what I also see is the rise of virtual tourism.
Yes, I was just going to ask if somebody.
I was in New Orleans, and my daughter turned me on to somebody who did a tour of Jewish New Orleans, the history of Jewish New Orleans. And I thought, we took it. It was fabulous. I learned so much. And I thought, why don't they do things like this in other cities? And I think that Amy was saying, yes, that's what's going to happen. I mean, I'd love to take an Yigal tour or an Alex virtual tour before I went on a tour. So the people.
I was going to say same thing. It's sort of democratized. I mean, we've all just been discussing a very elite experience of traveling to remote places and faraway lands. And it has certainly opened up, which I think ultimately is good for everyone's business when people get a taste. I just wanted to add a small thing, only from the benefit of having spent the last 7 days living with 2 infectious disease experts. We don't know anything about this virus. They actually don't know. So it's not just a vaccine that we need to know. It's actually how it operates, how it mutates, all the sorts of things. They talk about safety theater. I mean, they are writing the protocols for Maine, and Maine as a state hit tremendously hard this year. They make all their money in 3 months here as in this economy. And, you know, yes, you can take someone's temperature, but according to them, it actually means nothing because you're infectious for 2 days before you have a temperature. You can wear gloves, but they're meaningless. So there's a lot of theater, they call it sanitation or safety theater going on, that gives a false sense of hope. So whether it's a vaccine or actually just a larger body of knowledge of what to do and what not to do, I spent 3 hours with someone who explained that 6 feet of social distancing is like a sledgehammer. They have no idea how far you need or how short you need, but it seems okay, and we'll just apply it everywhere. But so I think it's important to keep those things in mind, especially when we're talking about remote places that haven't been hit, all that kind of stuff, because it's very arrogant to think, well, we've covered it and we can figure it out.
Well, it's the same thing. I'm in Martha's Vineyard, and the 2 cases of COVID in the past, I don't know how many weeks and weeks and weeks, have been both people working in the hospitality industry. So the restaurant that one of Obama's daughters worked at last year had to be closed down because a worker got it. And so what happens is people are afraid to go out. They see that, they read what's been happening, you know, it's scary.
I will say one thing I learned on the Aspen Institute panel, airplanes are not so bad. There's a tremendous amount of fresh air, and dilution is one of the key ways to combat this virus. It's one of the hardest things for internal environments. There is no dilution of fresh air possible, but 40% of the air is recycled in airplanes. So yes, your neighbor may be sick and coughing on you and not wearing a mask, and that's another problem. But actually being in an airplane, I was surprised to see, is not the worst place to be from a ventilation and viral load standpoint.
Except Zeke Emanuel will not go on a plane. Absolutely, nor will.
Yeah,
but
I know, but his colleagues will at the CDC. I'm working with them.
I was on a plane and somebody was sneezing all over the place, and I told them since the plane was empty that I had to move.
Yeah,
I mean, if somebody's sneezing,
I'm not advising anyone to jump on a plane, but there are being in a restaurant is much worse than being in an airplane, is what I've learned. And being in a theater in Broadway is the worst place of all.
So we are, I think we have run out of time, but Erinn, you hadn't said anything, and I wanted to give you a minute if you wanted to add anything. Not necessary if you don't, but just floor is yours.
Oh, no. I mean, I think all the panelists, I mean, I've learned so much as well, you know, with this. I think that it is going to be, yeah, as we talk about smaller areas, but, you know, even when we're talking about just going back into the tourism and convention space, a lot of industry experts are saying it's going to be the 2nd and 3rd tier cities that are going to actually be more desirable than the 1st tier. So it's making sure that they're ready for these smaller groups, for these smaller conferences, for these smaller conventions that are actually going to be looking for that area. So there's still a lot of opportunity in so many areas.
Well, I think we have opportunity out of this crisis. I just want to thank you, and I have a couple of words just to summarize. Takeaway words: community, protocols, small tours, the potential of Africa for tourism, and the focus on safety. But virtual tourism seems to be the future. And I think every one of you have made a very important point about our underestimating the power of this. There are thousands and thousands of YouTubes that are virtual tourisms, including a man in India that cooks a new meal every day and has 1 million followers, and he lives in a tiny village. So there is the opportunity to see that. And I just want to thank everyone, and I thank Dame Amy, my colleague and chef, who was willing to do this, Mitchell Davis for your time, Erinn Tucker for your time, Yigal, Schliefer for your time, Joan for stepping away from the beautiful outdoors to join us today, and Alex for your wisdom about travel. Let's hope they have a vaccine soon, because we all want to get on the road, but in the meantime, keep the creative thinking going. And my thanks to all the Doms, and I'm going to let you leave and have a pleasant afternoon wherever you are.
Johanna, can I just add one quick thing?
Absolutely, Joan.
Erinn was talking, and I remember when I was hiking in Ethiopia, and I looked, they told me that in Lalibela, which has all these gorgeous churches, that I saw a hotel being built on a mountaintop. And I thought, Ethiopia is in the cusp right now. It has got an amazing history, and it's going to be something of the future. There are going to be lots of restaurants opening up. There's going to be not huge tourism, but there'll be, you know, smaller tourism. And I thought it's really important that they don't go into a Venice, which is now, the people in Venice are just, there's too many tourists there, that they don't destroy their own Lalibela by making these ugly hotels on the top of mountains for other people. And I think it's really important for these countries to try to protect. They want to give jobs to people, but they also want to protect their environment.
Well, I think that's the subject of the next one, about the multilateralism of tourism and climate. So stay tuned. We can have another panel, but thank you and have a wonderful afternoon on behalf of
Thank you
Tom.
all.
Thank you, Amy. Bye-bye.
Wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.